Okay, Hare Krishna, everyone. Um, Today we're part of the Karuna Care Education team, attempting to discuss a little bit about grief. Recently, there have been a number of incidents that have taken place in our ISKCON community, specifically the passing of His Holiness Bhakti Swami, and there have been other things as well. My name is Yamuna Jivandas, and I serve in ISKCON Chicago as part of the Devotee Care Committee as well as the Outreach Committee. And I'm also a student to our special guest here today, Mother Rambhoru, or Robin Brinkman, who's well known in the ACPE circles. For those who may not know, that's the Association of Clinical Pastoral Education. She's a board certified educator for chaplains, specifically in the Los Angeles area, and for many years has been providing pastoral care and pastoral care education to a number of clergy across the country. So we're very, very fortunate to have her presence. She's also the director of the Karuna Care Education Initiative in ISKCON, which is a new initiative intended to educate us in pastoral care and compassionate care. So with that as an introduction, Hare Krishna, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. So today we're going to address, as I mentioned, the topic of grief. So maybe we'll just start something very basic. So Mother Rambhoru, what exactly would be categorized as grief?
Well, grief is the normal and natural reaction to any significant emotional loss of any kind. I mean, it's not a disease. It's not abnormal. When you lose something that you're attached to or you love, it's normal to grieve. Grief is the feeling in response to a loss, and mourning is the process of grieving. Typically, there's conflicting feelings that are caused by a loss and a kind of pattern of behavior following a loss. So that's basically just the response to any loss of any magnitude.
And what would be some symptoms? Like, how would I know I'm going through grief? Or how would I know that someone that's close to me is going through grief?
Well, for ourselves, we all grieve differently. You know, we sometimes we can't concentrate. Sometimes, particularly in the beginning, when we've had a significant loss, we may feel numb. We may be totally removed from our emotions. We might not be able to sleep, or we might have nightmares. We might not be able to eat at all, or we may find ourselves eating unusually a lot. We might have kind of a roller coaster of emotions that are unpredictable. Like we could suddenly be angry, for no apparent reason, or we might start crying for no apparent reason or not rational reason. And these are all responses that could appear when you are grieving. So there's lots to this, but basically are just irrational behaviors that occur when you have not really had a moment to process your grief feelings.
And you were just sharing with me some time ago that how sometimes you've heard of persons getting into car accidents, like more frequently than they would otherwise.
It is not uncommon that when a person has experienced a significant loss, to have a very, total their car, because you're driving and you're not concentrating because your mind is somewhere else. You become preoccupied or spaced out, and you may yourself have not just a car accident, you may trip and fall, you may have an accident yourself, but car accidents are very common with a person who has had a significant loss. Yeah.
And is a significant loss restricted to maybe death, or what other things would inspire such a feeling of loss?
Well, actually, there's about 43 identified losses that are considered to be grief inspired. Death is just one of them. Divorce is considered to be a significant loss. Retirement, going from 50 years of working and then suddenly stopping work. Moving homes or moving towns. Losing a pet. A financial change, even if it's a significant increase of finances, can totally put you in crisis and figure out how you're managing your new life. It could be decrease in income. It could be loss of health, legal problems, empty nest syndrome. When your kids grow up and they go away, there's grief there attached. Even an end of addiction. You've been using some substance to cope, and suddenly you stop that addiction. Then there's some grief. Now the feelings are coming up that you were using to suppress, using some kind of substance to suppress. You stop that addiction, and now those feelings come up, and you have to really learn to manage those grief symptoms, because addiction is really covering the unresolved grief. Starting to school, there's a grief thing there for children as well. They've been in the home. Moms and dads are grieving because the kids are not home. They're used to having them home. And even losing a body part, like you lose an arm or a leg or a foot or a toe, you've lost something. So those are just some physical ways that a person might be grieving. And there's some intangible aspects of grief, like loss of trust, loss of safety, loss of control, loss of faith. That happens. You've been disappointed by somebody or an organization, and you had hope and you thought that they were going to be there for you, and they're not. And there's grief around that. So there's just lots. So anything you've lost is a great reason to grieve.
We've seen, recently we were in a conversation with some devotees where they were sharing how they were feeling a lot of grief, especially with His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami is leaving. And then a friend of theirs was advising them, just need to hear and chant more, just need to hear and chant more. And they're saying, it's not working. And rather, I think they expressed something along the lines of being able to share their feelings. So could you speak a little bit about that? What is it that would help someone who is grieving to sort of feel a little bit of solace?
Yeah, good question. It's just like this. If you break your leg, you go to a doctor and they tie it up. It's a physical break, right? You've lost the use of your limb, so you need a physical treatment for a physical illness, physical issue. And same thing, if you have an emotional heartbreak due to a loss, then you may chant and hear all you like, but it doesn't take the pain away. You have mind, body, and spirit. So when you have an emotional loss or emotional feelings, you have to treat those emotions. And so it makes total sense that this person said, oh yeah, I'm chanting and I am hearing and I'm reading a lot, and it's not taking my pain away. And what happened after that was in the group that we gathered a few days ago, and we sat and we passed around a microphone, and everybody got to share what their feelings were around that grief. And that is the way of healing that grief, is by talking about it a lot, talking about your grief with those you trust in a safe environment, and crying those tears. You have to actually express those feelings and talk about them and process them and make meaning of those feelings in order to heal those feelings. One thing is for sure is that tears are like the blood. Like you cut your leg, blood comes out, pus comes out. When we cry, it's a way for us to detox. It's like detoxing our heart, our emotions. And so it's very healing to cry. And sadly, most people are all the time holding those feelings in because they're embarrassed, or they don't want to impose their grief on others. Everybody says, laugh and the world laughs with you, cry and you cry alone. So people, they hold them in. And in our society, your job will give you 3 days of free paid days off to grieve, and hope that after 3 days, you're back to normal. And so people never really get a chance to fully express their feelings of grief, which is setting themselves up also for all kinds of physical ailments, because unprocessed grief turns into disease. Your body actually somatizes things like heart, kidney, cancer. Those things are really related to unprocessed grief.
Wow. Could you speak a little bit more about that? How how does that happen on an individual level or a societal level, that unprocessed grief leads to pain? What does it look like? Is it always disease, or there's some other symptoms?
Well, the word disease means uneasy, anxiety, right? And we know from Ayurveda that there are three main causes of disease: overeating, uncleanliness, and stress. And of those three, stress is the main cause of disease. So if you eat in stress, if you are, living in stress, working in stress, then you've got this underlying current of imbalance. And if you know anything about the chakra system, you'll know that when your chakra system is out of sync, then you're much more open to stress, which translates into disease. So now if I'm feeling stress or emotional pain, and I never get to really, I have to keep working because society tells me I have to keep working, and in order to function, I have to repress those feelings. What happens is those feelings break out in inappropriate behavior, or like a car accident, or I'm spacing out, because it takes a lot of energy from our bodies and our minds to suppress them. The image is like if you are in the swimming pool and you have two big beach balls, and now you're trying to keep them underwater, if you've ever tried to do that. And if you don't keep pressing down on those beach balls, boop, they pop up. So unresolved grief is like that. There is some part of your brain that's all the time trying to keep them submerged from your consciousness so you can function. And so if you have, like you're tired, or you have another loss and another loss, they compound, they build on each other until you can't hold that. The pressure of that is so much that it starts trying to get your attention. And that's what happens when we get disease. If you haven't heard the small voice that your inner voice is telling you, that you need to pay attention to your unresolved emotions, then what happens is the voice gets louder and louder and louder until you can no longer ignore it. In fact, in the hospital, probably 99% of the people in the hospital are there because they're having a spiritual crisis. That's really what that's about, is that they have ignored their inner voice or Lord in the heart for so long, and Krishna's trying to tell them something. You need to deal with this unprocessed grief, and because people are busy and they have to keep going and they have to keep face for everybody, I'm happy and I'm okay, and they're medicating that with caffeine and TV and pornography and food, until finally they're so unbalanced that they end up in the hospital.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Totally.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So we have a whole world that's doing this. This is our culture, Western culture.
If I'm going through grief, how would I know that I'm resolved at a certain point? Or how would I know that a friend of mine or a dear one is resolved of their grief?
Well, it doesn't mean when we have processed or integrated our grief, doesn't mean you're not sad sometimes. That's an illusion. Your life will be changed forever. When you have a significant loss, it's not that you're ever going to get back to normal, but you are going to transform into a new person who has integrated this loss. And one good sign that can tell you that you are actually have digested a loss is that you can talk about the person you lost in positive ways. It's not always when you're a person who has unresolved grief, typically doesn't want to express their feelings. They don't want to talk about anything but the positive parts of the person, or they only want to talk about the negative parts, or they totally avoid altogether talking about that person they love. Now, if you've healed that, if you feel you can speak about that person very fondly. You know, you have great memories about what you enjoyed together, and you've created some kind of a either a ritual or a way to remember that person, that brings them into your life. I think what people try to do is they try to get over it really fast, and they try to forget the person because society's telling you, suck it up, get over it, forget about it. There'll be a new person. Like a woman who has lost a baby, often people say, don't worry, you can have another one. No,
Yeah.
it's not that easy. Or if your marriage is broken up, or you've broken up with your girlfriend or boyfriend, people go, don't worry, there's plenty of fish in the sea. Not really. It's still a loss. So, you know, but a symptom that you are on the way to recovery is that you can talk about it without becoming overwhelmed, and you actually enjoy remembering the person. And so we see in our movement, we have these wonderful Vyasa Puja celebrations of Srila Prabhupada, and festivals where we remember stories. This is a very healthy way to heal that grief by remembering, creating a ritual. Some people who have lost children or a family member will light a candle. You know, my mom is 92, and she lost her firstborn son at the 3 days old. He was a blue baby, and she never grieved that. You know, everybody told her, don't worry, you can have more kids. You know, she was 18 years old. And but she noticed for like 75 years that every year on his death day, that she felt this deep sadness, and she couldn't understand it till she looked at the calendar and realized, oh, that's the day Keith died, which is what his name. And so when I was started doing this work myself, I said to my mom, why don't you light a candle for him every year? Just on that, or at that time, light a candle so that you're not trying to forget him. This memory is trying to burst into your reality. Bring him into this world of yours. And she has done that for the last 5 years and has made a huge difference. So she lights a candle for the memory of that person, and in this way, that person is alive in her heart. And we do a lot of memory making, and it's very, very healing to do that.
70 years later, she's been able to heal from that. That's amazing.
Well,
My
people
wife
just don't
also,
know.
my-
People don't know.
yeah. My wife went through actually a couple of miscarriages before we had our first son, and we would advise something very similar, is to bring some closure to the event, put a memento in your house to represent that child that was lost. So we did that, and I think it was certainly very helpful.
But what's interesting just about my mom's case that I learned is that I mean, I had a sister, myself and my sister, and I never thought about the fact that my brother was always present in our family, kind of as a ghost, a subtle being. Not he was a ghost, but because my mom and dad never spoke about him, they never talked about the 9 months that they anticipated the birth, and they had bought things. I mean, there was a huge grief there. You know, families prepare for the birth of a child, and then it doesn't happen, and then they're embarrassed that it didn't take birth. I mean, they bought all these things and prepared a nursery and all of that stuff, and then they don't grieve about it. And what I've realized is that I was raised in a 3-child family, even though my brother wasn't there. His presence was so much there in the unconsciousness of my parents, who parented me and my sister in a different way because they had had this first loss. In fact, what I noticed is my mother very over-mothered my sister, who over-mothered me. So I was the baby of the family, had 2 mothers, my mom and my sister, because if you lose a child, then you realize how precious it is to have a child. But it just people have no knowledge. There's no education around. This is the one thing people don't want to talk about besides death. You know, grieving and death. Nobody's going to be popular at a party if they start talking about that.
That's
No,
true.
well.
The point you made about tears was a really nice one. The tears of blood. It's kind of the healing process is to actually let those tears flow. Well, a couple of thoughts. One is for you know, in a male body, that's not considered especially laudable to do. And the other is that, what is it that we can, so can you address that? And can you also address what can we say to assist another person to enter into integrating their grief, where those tears come out? Not that, you don't want to force it either, but you want to do it in a very gentle and loving. So could you share some thoughts on what would be some ways to approach that?
Well, what I've noticed in male grief, many men turn to anger. That's one thing they do. I'm at the hospital where, a couple has lost a baby and or a wife or someone, they start pounding the walls or, punching something, and underneath that is the hurt. It goes to that grief. And I think understanding what that is helpful for the people around them, is that sometimes grief is manifested as anger. And then it comes to denial. Sometimes not just men, but people can't even accept that this has happened. It takes a while to sink in that this person's really gone and they're not coming back. But men and women need to have a space where they feel safe with people who are not going to judge them. They're not going to advise them. They're not going to try to distract them and say, it's okay to cry and it's okay to be silent. A lot of men in all cultures will move into silence, and they are stoic. And then the next thing they know, they have heart disease or they have cancer, because they are repressing that. Because the body is telling you, you're not paying attention, and so it's manifesting in some other thing. And now you do have to pay attention, and they're really sad. The grief comes out about their illness or whatever. But you can really help somebody. What I've noticed with men is that another man can share an experience. Men typically connect and can manage loss by sharing an experience. So taking walks, going on hikes with another man, who doesn't talk so much, share the silence. If you're a builder or a gardener, men, when they're grieving, usually like to work. That's how they process. First, they're just doing something with their bodies, walking, like I said, garden work or something, but you need companionship. You can't do this by yourself. There's something really powerful about having a witness to your grief. So not being alone in your grief is really important. It doesn't mean you have to talk also. And to have somebody who can be with you without pressurizing you to talk about it is important. Memory making is also really important. And it doesn't need to have a lot of crying. I mean, men may not do a lot of crying, but they can reflect. Memory making, tell me about your loved one and what has it meant for you that they're gone, or what did you love about them? And because again, bhakti is the yoga of love. There's going to be grief if you love, particularly devotees. You can expect there to be grief when they're gone. We have so many instances in the Chaitanya Charitamrita with Haridas Thakur, the grief. I mean, certainly he was liberated and going back to Godhead, but everybody who's left behind is feeling some sadness and missing that person. But I mean, just being present. In the old days in America, I don't know what they did in India, but in the old days in America, when someone in the town would lose a loved one, all the women of the town would come and they would bring something to eat, like some comfort food, some pie and cake and a casserole or whatever, and they'd come to the person's home who had lost someone with all their knitting and handwork and everything, and they just sit on the couch with that person, and it may be totally in silence. They're just being with them without any pressure to talk about it, but just to accompany them so they're not alone. That's the worst part of suffering, is doing it alone. Is just knowing that you're not alone is huge. So bringing food, I was in, I guess I was in, where was I? In Kulu, Manali. I spent a summer up there in the Himalayas near Ladakh, on the way. And somebody died. And we woke up one morning and there was all this wailing in the neighborhood. We could hear all this, it was just like screaming and wailing. And I didn't know that was a kind of a expectation that when somebody dies, the women should roll on the ground and cry and this and that, because the men told me, well, if you don't cry like that, people think you didn't really love the person. So people kind of put it a little more dramatized.
Oh
But
my God.
yeah, it's funny. It's funny, but not funny, because mourning is a thing. It's a
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So the whole town got involved, and I noticed when I looked up, it was a kind of in a valley. I think we were in Kulu, Dharmashala, maybe it was Dharmashala. And people were coming, I could see people coming down from their little houses up on the mountain, and they all had a bag of food with them. Just a little bag. It might be rice, it might be beans, it could be chapatis, and they all came with some food. And they sat down. The person who had died was laid out on a blanket on the ground, and then the women were sitting around, and some of them were screaming and crying. The men were kind of in the back smoking a cigarette. But the food part was important, because what happens when a person has had a significant loss, they lose their appetite, they lose their desire to do anything, like to cook and to clean. And one of the most helpful things your neighbors can do is to offer to do some of those practical things, like, can I go grocery shopping for you? Can I come clean your house? Can I take care of your children for you, for a couple of days or a couple of hours? Anything you can do to give them space to rest and recover is really, really appreciated by the griever.
That's wonderful. The idea of companionship is it just feels nice just hearing about it.
Yeah.
Considering if someone was going through grief. So I want to maybe ask you if you have any closing thoughts at this point, since we're up on our time here.
I would say that, first of all, allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling. Everybody does this differently, and we can't compare grief. This one's not crying, they mustn't be sad. This one's crying a whole bunch, and they must be more sad. Everybody does this different. It's okay. There's no length of time for grief to be done. It's a lifetime. You're going through a transformation. You're not going to get back to normal. There's no normal. You're going to be a new person at the other end of that. And it's really about integrating it. And the last thing I would say is take care of yourself. Make sure that you're eating properly, because that usually is what happens. People start eating junk food or comfort food, and now you feel even worse. So eating healthy food if you can, and if neighbors are around you, to bring things that are healthy, like fresh food, fresh cooked food, sattvic food. Getting out in nature is really healing. Prabhupada used to say that green up and green down was rejuvenating. So if you can get out in nature, even on a blanket and a pillow and a yoga mat in a forest or where there's green, and take a nap out there, you'll feel significantly better just by being in nature. Taking walks is really powerful. And taking off from work if you can. If you can take a few, we call them in chaplaincy mental health days. If you wake up in the morning and you're just overwhelmed with grief, call in sick. You don't have to tell them what the sickness is. You're just having a mental health day. That's it. And I would, if you have vacation days, take some time off. I would definitely do that. Spend time with your family. Just rest. Getting enough sleep is huge. And hearing beautiful music, that's helpful. And being with friends.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I think this is a short but perhaps very useful video. So we'll conclude with that. And I'm hoping that we can do one more of these to go a little more deeper into some of these aspects that you brought up. I thought the number of points were particularly intriguing and very meaningful.
Okay.
So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, and hopefully
Hare
we'll meet
Krishna.
again. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.